Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about ESFPs and careers, the personality type of ESFPs and careers. And just to start this off, one of the things we've been doing, Antonia, and we've noticed in our new mentorship program we've been working on, so we've got this personality life path mentorship where we have people come together and every week, we do this for 8 weeks, we go through each of the Jungian cognitive functions, the archetypical energy it represents, and then each person's relationship to that function and that energy in the world. So, and we all have to engage with all of these 8 energies. Talk more about that in a different episode possibly, but just to understand, we're working with people and we're going through life changes they want to make. Now that they know who they are, how they're wired, how they're showing up to the world, you know, the you are here dot on the map of their life. This program's talking about the actual map of their life. Where are you headed? What terrain do you have to navigate? What are your goals, intentions, optimizations? What are you doing with this knowledge? And in the midst of that, we're hearing from many people in a transition moment of their life. They're saying, I've been doing this career for 10, 15, 20 years. And they're describing the career they're doing. And it doesn't necessarily match up with the strengths that I would assume for their personality type. And they're struggling. A lot of people are saying, I don't feel like it's rewarding. Maybe for a time I could make it work, but now I'm in a reset moment. I want to do something different. And often it's about career choice. It's about career trajectory. So today we want to talk about the ESFP personality type and careers. What does this mean for you? If you're an ESFP or there's an ESFP in your life, what are some things you could be thinking around careers that would help you do the things that you want to do, navigate the space and feel successful in life?
Well, and I think the reason why this is so timely is, I do believe a lot of people are in transition around career right now. Not only that, but there's also, at least for me, burgeoning information that has reframed the relationship I see people having to their careers, particularly the work of our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi, who has done quite a bit of research on what is becoming an idea around subtypes. And if you want to listen to that, we did a whole episode on it. If you want to listen to that episode, we did it with Dario. I think it's called like the 4 subtypes. Or
we'll link to it in the show notes and the description, all that.
Yeah, we'll link to it because I don't remember what it's called. But the interesting thing about that particular research was that as an intake, while he was looking at people doing, of a specific personality type, doing certain activities, and they're hooked up to an EEG machine and watching their brain wave patterns around all of this.
Yeah.
He realized that there are a couple of different, or at least he observed that there were a couple different things that directly relate to careers. One of them being that after the age of 25, the career you have chosen has the most influence on how your brain waves are going to show up.
Yeah. And
which subtype you might land in, meaning that the subtype is more associated with nurture, the things we're doing day to day, than it is with our pre-wiring, which would be more like nature. So the career choice we make isn't just whether or not it's in alignment with our personality. It actually might help craft our personality or how it shows up.
Expression of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. It's really interesting to know how influenced we are by our career, not just how we feel about our career. The second thing that is really interesting is that the breadth of career choices based on this idea that there are, different subtypes or ways that our type can show up, that the breadth is actually much broader than I had originally thought for people's personality types. Take, for example, we're going to talk about ESFPs today and their career choices. When I think of ESFPs, I think I synthetically sort of limit the ideal careers for these personality types because I'm thinking of them in terms of, like, say, their dominant or driver cognitive function and their co-pilot or auxiliary function. What would be the best for those parts of an ESFP's personality type? And that's not always the case.
Yep.
Right? Sometimes there are career choices or career fields that live outside of those first 2 functions that are actually very much in alignment with the individual. So in this particular episode, and in any episode we do around personality types and careers, we want to address this idea of subtypes because that's very influential in not only the career choices that we make, but also how those careers mold us to be slightly different expressions of our type. And they might be perfectly fine. Like they might be great careers for each of these subtypes that don't usually, fall in the list of the ESFP careers or whatever type we're talking about.
Absolutely. So today, just to land this, we're going to talk about ESFPs. We're going to talk about 4 flavors or subtypes of ESFPs. The expression, you're still an ESFP. Your brain, your cognition is still ESFP cognition. But sometimes the flavoring and the way you show up to the world has a difference. And we're going to talk about 4 versions of that. Mm-hmm. Before we get into that, let me just talk about, I did some general internet research, Antonia. This is highly calibrated research, just doing some internet searches.
What did the internet say?
So I just did some search just to get a sense of what like the internets say are the top 10 career choices for ESFPs. And this is just a general list. This is anecdotal. It's not necessarily super depth researched or voted on or anything. But through the research I did, just a general sense, here's some ideas. Salesperson for ESFP, event planner, an entertainer like an actor or musician, a real estate agent. I actually know a ESFP real estate agent. We met him in Austin at our mentorship. Mm-hmm. A chef, that makes sense. Marketing advertising executive, fashion designer, a teacher, particularly for elementary or physical education, the internet would say, a tour guide, or a human resources manager. So these are, the general research. If you're an ESFP doing research online, like what careers are good for me, you're probably going to get Google or an AI bot to spit back a list very similar to the list I just read. And you and I know that ESFPs have many more career options in front of them than those limits on this list particularly.
Yeah, they might be very intriguing though. If an ESFP is listening, they're like, oh, that sounds good to me. But like you said, there are a lot more options out there, particularly depending upon the person's subtype. So if you're brand new to type or it's pretty early days for you and you're just sort of trying to figure out what this whole ESFP thing means all by itself, we're going to be talking about this in 2 different layers of complexity. But I think if you're new, you're still going to be able to follow along. And if you are somebody who is a type geek and is super into this, then we'll also address some of these components there too. But if you're new to type, hang with us because I think that this is going to be valuable no matter what level you're at right now.
Yeah.
So the 4 different subtypes of ESFPs, and these are actually the same subtypes of all types, are the dominant version, the creative version, the normalizing version, and the harmonizing version. Now, if you're a type geek, what this really means is that your first 2 cognitive functions, your dominant, or what we call driver function in the car model, and your auxiliary, or what we call the co-pilot, these cognitive functions are going to have an either what's called analytic or holistic expression. And basically what that means, I'm starting to see it even more simply in like output and input. Yeah. There's 2 different directions that each of these functions take, which is more like expression and pushing my energy out to the world. And then there's an expression that is more of an input or receiving information from the world. And each of the functions can do both of these, right? They can both input and output. But we have a tendency to like one of those expressions more. We either like the output version or the input version more.
Just quickly, somebody could confuse that with introversion or extroversion. So just make sure you land that point clearly. We're not talking about introvert or extrovert here.
No, exactly.
Input output's different.
Exactly. We're more talking about using the function to assert our will in the world or to be sensitive to other people's assertion, like kind of receiving information. And each of the functions has a slightly different way it shows up when it's in output versus input.
Yeah, one way to think of it is like a real intense focus versus more of like a diffused view.
Right.
Like a lens we see things through.
Exactly. And so depending upon whether or not you have a preference for that more assertive energy with those 2 functions or receptive energy for those 2 functions, and in what order you prefer that in, it's going to change your subtype. Now, we get trained into output or input, or maybe more assertive versus receptive energy, I should say. We get trained into this as people. And part of that training is the career choice we have. So some of these career options are going to be far better for some of the subtypes than others. Like take, for example, when I talk about the creative subtype of ESFPs, these positions might not be as attractive to somebody who is a normalizing ESFP and vice versa. If you're a dominant ESFP type, it's not going to be as attractive. The career options for dominant ESFPs are not going to be as attractive for harmonizing ESFPs and vice versa. So some of these are going to be probably more attractive to you depending upon your subtype, and others are going to be like, really? ESFPs would want to do that? And yeah, probably the ESFP subtype that's very different than your subtype.
And if you listen to the full episode with Dr. Nardi about the subtypes, I believe in that episode we go into the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in our brain also have a play in this too.
Right.
So it's not just nurture, it's also nature, but might be influenced by nurture. Certain chemicals our brain gets used to or likes more than others tends to lean us in one of these 4 directions.
That's right. Exactly. Okay. So let's talk about what those careers are. And again, actually, interestingly enough, if you're a young ESFP just starting out, like maybe you're in your early 20s, as I mentioned, after 25, your career choice very much influences how your type is going to show up in this way. So you might be at the cusp of making choices that will encourage you to land in one of these 4 subtypes. So be sensitive to which description fits you now and maybe where you want to end up, right? Like what kind of, traits or characteristics you would like to show up with as an ESFP.
Yeah. So let's talk about the dominant subtype.
Okay. So dominant ESFPs, they're energetic. In some ways, I think dominant ESFPs and creative ESFPs are more the stereotype that we get about these types.
Yeah.
So this is going to be more of a stereotypical ESFP that comes to your mind. Energetic, optimistic, outgoing, confident, energizes a room with charisma. They lead active lives while pursuing their ambitions. They're interested in creative and analytic topics, but more facilitating than directive. So even though they're a dominant version, they're more facilitating how people are doing things than telling them what to do. They usually do well in school. So maybe that's not something that you have in your mind as an ESFP trait, but I know so many ESFPs that have excelled in school. It's kind of weird that that's not part of the stereotype of ESFPs.
Yeah.
There is the challenge of sitting in your desk all day for sure, or sitting in your seat at a desk. But if an ESFP, especially if they have dominant characteristics, if they're in a context that allows them to get a little of that energetic steam out, they are almost always very good they have an academic bent to them, really. They can be competitive or territorial. So that's part of the dominant element is there's like a competitive and territorial, component to them.
Yeah.
So taking all of these characteristics, together, that they have a more in-charge style. They usually have strong physical presence. They're active hands-on learners. They're usually tactful and friendly communicators with fairly good self-control. They move through problems with step-by-step problem-solving, hands-on problem-solving to figure things out. And they tend to be quite popular. So the careers that either create this kind of ESFP or are suited to this kind of ESFP, because both things are true, are things like counseling, marketing, which is one of the top 10s that you mentioned, media production, outdoor adventure, politics, recruiting, and talent scouting. These are good for them because they have a high ability to read other people. And so the dominant ESFP type is tuned into others as well. And they're usually good at reading people and getting through a situation using that charisma. So politics is a good one. And as mentioned, and talent scouting is a good one. What's nice about this list too, I don't think we mentioned this before, but what's nice about this list is it's not just things that would suit this type, but when Dario was doing his interviews with people, part of the intake was what career are you already, in? And so these were some of the careers listed for people who have this dominant flavoring of ESFP.
So he would basically, what you're saying is he would bring them in, ask them their career, hook them up to the brain scan EEG machine, watched their brain pattern, and he noticed a clustering of these careers based on the patterns of the brain that would light up.
Right. Exactly.
And in fact, all 4 of these, it was based on brain patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk about, so I just want to make a note, mention the dominant subtype of ESFP. It seems like there's a comfort and maybe even a seeking after competitive spaces, politics, the competition of politics. I mean, counseling is, I guess, not competitive, but marketing certainly is. Media, you're looking for eyeballs, attention, even recruiting, you're looking for the best talent. So it's a lot of like hunting, gathering, competitive, like assertion, energy, like make something happen in the world, get it done, make this thing more than it was, et cetera, et cetera.
But again, it's more facilitating than directive.
Sure.
So I think a person who's a dominant ESFP certainly can be directive and bark orders. You know, I could see a director as an ESFP barking orders at everybody underneath them to get things done. But I think that they do best when they're in a situation where they can more facilitate things happening.
Take initiative to facilitate.
You got it.
Great.
Okay.
Let's talk about creative.
All right. So creative. Oh, by the way, for those of you who are type geeks, the first 2 functions, the dominant, auxiliary, what we call driver, co-pilot, if you have a preference for the analytic version of both, so both your extroverted sensing or sensation is the analytic or the more assertive version.
Yeah.
And your introverted feeling or authenticity is the more assertive version. If those 2 are assertive, or what's called analytic, then you make that makes the dominant subtype. All right, so this creative subtype, for those of you who are tech geeks, it's when your perceiving function, in this case, extroverted sensing or sensation, the dominant driver, that is analytic or assertive, but the judging function, in this case, introverted feeling or authenticity, that's the more receptive. It's a holistic version of that function. That's what makes the creative subtype. But for those of you who aren't type geeks, I'll just read some of the characteristics. Adventurous, bold, entertaining, expressive and curious, especially about people. Live for the moment, ideally with friends and loved ones. In touch with convictions, deeply appreciative of style and beauty. Bored by routine, can lack discipline, struggled in school, and gets tunnel vision. So this actually might be the most stereotypical version of the ESFP, is the creative version.
This is the one all the teachers had struggled with. You're daydreaming. Just pay attention. Stop getting up. Sit still and listen.
Yep, exactly. But of course, they have a lot of great strengths to them. They epitomize the get things going style. If you're familiar with Linda Barron's work, they take in a lot of information at once with extra attention to facts, people, and the physical environment, and they act on all of that really quickly. So there's a speed element to ESFPs that are the creative type.
Yeah.
They have just enough executive skills to keep things together and present to society, but it is definitely not something that they enjoy doing, unlike their more dominant brethren. And they usually have an eye for artistic details, which makes them very suited to the creative version of the subtype. So they have a strong artistic potential in everything they do. And so things that are really up their alley are things like acting, comedy, dance, DJing, fashion design, modeling, music, singing, sports, video blogging. And there's also a technical side that can come out with these ESFPs. And that technical side can be seen in things like advertising, banking, marketing, right? Marketing comes up again. But whatever it is that they're doing, the passion is actually working with an audience.
I think it's interesting just how, so that assertive, dominant, or driver function of extrovert sensing sensation, it's like, I'm going to go get the experience. I'm going to go attack it. I'm going to go out in the world and feel the richness of it. But the judging function, the introverted feeling or authenticity, being holistic, is more receptive, more open to the core values or how things happen. It's not as particular about it. And so you can see that the judgments of like keeping things in order, keeping things structured, all of that stuff is probably not on the radar as much because you're more open to just letting it happen how it happens. But you really want to go and attack the creative things in the world. So I think that's a very interesting difference between that and the dominant subtype.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's also more of a, I think that this is definitely less academic, but it's also more expressive.
Yeah.
And so there's not that like did really well in school component, but there is a capacity oftentimes, especially if it's physical, to look like an expert the first time they're doing something.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like the fast learning is a big piece of it. So they might actually be a little bit more autodidactical, meaning that they're self-taught. This is the more self-taught version of the ESFP. And because of that, there also might be a boldness to try new things. Right? There's not a waiting so much on the situation to present itself. The creative ESFP might go carve a niche for themselves, even more than the dominant ESFP, interestingly enough. And so there might be more of a courage to try new things and, go their own way.
Yeah, I mean, going their own way, being very independently creative, expressive, the individual being expressive. This is probably the most expressive of all 4 subtypes of the ESFP. The one that's going to be on the stage as the solo performer or something like that. If you see an ESFP in that role, they're probably that creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that willingness to figure things out on their own and having to teach themselves skills because school was not a great environment.
Yeah.
I think that ends up creating a bit of an appetite of self-improvement for a good percentage of creative ESFPs.
Yeah. So
they actually might be into personal growth. They might be into self-improvement, and they also might enjoy turning on light bulbs for other people. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they can also go into not just performance, but also into things that are, helpful for others as well.
Yeah.
And so they might get into human development to some extent, right? So that performance component, I've seen ESFPs who are performers in some way, but the point isn't to just get accolades from the audience. It's to actually teach a lesson.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not uncommon for creative subtypes as well.
Let's talk about normalizing. The normalizing subtype of the ESFP personality.
Right. So this is a subtype that I don't think most people associate with ESFPs. This might be the one that people are like maybe if you're a normalizing ESFP subtype yourself, you might have struggled to find your personality type because it goes against all the stereotypes.
Well, as an EFP, I'm an ENFP. The idea of the word normalizing makes my skin crawl. Like that word, it feels like profanity to me. Like, normalizing. Oh God, that sounds so horrible.
Yeah.
But I know that there's people wired this way.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure why it makes your skin crawl, but there is a component to, but you also, we've discovered when we get to ENFP types that you're probably more of a creative subtype.
Yeah.
And creatives and normalizing subtypes are actually almost diametrically opposed from each other. So it is unsurprising that you're not that attracted to the concept. Right? Of
course.
But there is a lot of benefits to being a normalizing ESFP. In some ways, they're less one-sided. They're a little bit more balanced. And so there are some advantages there. So for those of you that are type geeks, what normalizing means is that the judging function, in this case, introverted feeling or authenticity, the auxiliary copilot, that is the analytic version. That's the more assertive, moving the energy out function. And the perceiving function, in this case, extroverted sensing or sensation, the dominant or driver, that is the holistic. That's the more receptive energy. And that's what makes the normalizing subtype. So some of the characteristics of a normalizing ESFP is that they're detailed, organized, more subdued, supportive, hands-on problem solvers with concrete results. They're talented with business, marketing, and office administration. They can handle a mundane job combined with a fun hobby. They're down to earth and they dislike abstractions. So this is not something that a lot of ESFPs would, or this is not what we think of as an ESFP, a detail-oriented person, somebody who actually can sit for long amounts of time to do administrative work, somebody who is very organized. But this is an ESFP subtype. And in part, it's because they're not as insistent on being in that perceptive function. Like that doesn't have as much need or desire to assert itself, that energy, right? This is more of sort of a chill vibe ESFP. And a lot of times ESFPs become the subtype because of the career they chose. The career required them to be more detail oriented. It required them to be a little bit more okay with quote unquote being chained to a desk or whatever. And so that helped them bring in these other components of their personality type and rest in on them, which is why they tend to be less one-sided.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the jobs that they might hold, some of the careers they might go for. And this is probably the ESFP in your office, maybe a coworker. This could be you even, that is okay with they're not the stereotypical ESFP, creative, free spirit that can't sit still. This person can sit, they can do their work for multiple hours. They probably did really well in school. Like, this is an academically bent, or at least mindful, focused, detail-oriented style of ESFP.
Right. In Linda Barron's work, she would call this like a chart the course style.
Yeah.
And they tend to be, they have a jack of all trades flavor about them because they aren't so one-sided. And so there is an ability to kind of do whatever the situation needs of them. They're responsive to the needs of the situation. They, of course, just like all people with extroverted sensing or sensation preferences, are going to like a profession that's more hands-on. And they also enjoy some problem solving. Right? Like, they like to have a situation that needs them to do hands-on problem solving with concrete results. And because of that, there's actually a wide spectrum of things that suit them. Things like becoming a chef. That was one of the things that was mentioned on your list.
There you go.
So becoming a chef, they might have a knack for business, marketing again. This is probably why it ended up in the top 10 list, because all of the subtypes like marketing of ESFPs. Office administration, goods trading, hairstylist, makeup artist. They might be in the theater or the military, and they have a higher threshold for a quote unquote boring day job with a more mundane day job.
Yeah.
As long as they're subsidizing it with a very interesting hobby. So they might all day work in an office. I mean, I know somebody with ESFP preferences that is in charge of regulations in her company, making sure that her, like, everything that they're doing is able to, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in order to be able to, pass regulations and inspection in their industry.
Yeah.
But I also know a lot of ESFPs that do that kind of thing, jump on motorcycles to drive home, right? Or they hit the gym and they have like a really intense workout. Or they every weekend go camping, or every weekend go on like these big hikes. So if you do have one of these kinds of careers, as long as you have an interesting, hobby that allows you to feel a sense of aliveness, then a normalizing ESFP has a higher threshold for more office administration style jobs.
Yeah, and you mentioned like makeup artist, being in the theater. And immediately I went, wait a second, wouldn't that be a creative type ESFP? But the difference here is the creative type ESFPs are usually ones on stage in the spotlight. You mentioned like makeup artist. This is still a creative outlet, but it's not necessarily being the spotlight person. It's still contributing creatively to something. It's facilitating and supporting, but it's not the person up on the stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so a more of a support position, I think that is definitely a part of that.
But there's that creative flavoring still. You can see it, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. And I think that more subdued feeling for ESFPs of this subtype, I think it also gives them more patience for longer term projects. So these are the ESFPs that might be writing a book in the background. They might be doing a long-term project that you can see really pulls in maybe that introverted intuition or perspectives function for those of you who are into type, in cognitive functions. That inferior, what we call the 3-year-old, might be a little bit more obvious in ESFPs of this type. And that's what creates that more subdued, longer range, capacity.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk about the harmonizing ESFP. This is the final category.
That's
so let's
right.
talk about the functions. What's the direction here?
Okay, so for those of you who are type geeks, this harmonizing subtype effectively means that both of your preferred functions, both extroverted sensing sensation and introverted feeling authenticity, are holistic. That means that it's a more receiving energy in both of them. So this is going to be the most chill of the ESFPs.
Surfer dude?
Yeah. Well, surfer dude might be actually even more assertive.
Engaged. Yeah, okay.
Actually, no, I could see a surfer dude being like the holistic, chill vibe ESFP.
Guy that just lives in his van.
Yeah.
By the beach.
Yeah, although that might also be a creative type that doesn't really want to have a day job.
Sure.
What's interesting about these ESFPs is I think more of the type that is super into spirituality. Like, this is more that sort of good energy ESFP that
They're into the woo.
is into a little bit maybe of the woo-woo or the spiritual or the psychological, or, they're the ones who don't have that quote unquote need for speed. They're the ones who are more receptive to the environment around them. And it gives them an interesting skill set, particularly having ESFP preferences. So harmonizing ESFP, some of the trait descriptions are capable of great emotional, interpersonal, and spiritual depths, fine listening and speaking skills, clarity and depth around values. They navigate complex interpersonal situations. Psychology is a draw for the harmonizing subtype, as well as physical pursuits or a combination of the both, which is really interesting, right? What would be something that's a combination of psychology and physical pursuits?
I think of my background in, my faith background. I was in youth ministry. That's my parents run a youth ministry. A lot of youth pastors or youth volunteers, I think, were often ESFPs. They were interested in both the spiritual and esoteric, but they were also very interested in the activity of the fun and the engagement with students. And I saw that really beautifully blended. And I bet you a lot of them were these harmonizing ESFP styles.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic combination of those two things. Now, for the harmonizing subtype, there is a word of caution that Dario brings with some of this work, which is that they do need to be able to tap into some executive skills. Like take, for example, youth ministry requires quite a bit of executive skill. You need to, gather everybody together. You need to plan events. You need to be able to sort of have a shepherding, part of you. And so that would be a great, direction to go. But if they don't have strong executive skills, then they might really kind of get lost in this chill vibe energy and not be able to figure themselves out, not be able to figure out a direction, and they can get lost, a little lost, or maybe even lazy, and uncertain what they're supposed to be doing or bringing to the world, and uncertain of how to assert those things. So it's important that people who have this subtype preference as ESFPs really make sure that they're well-adjusted, right? They need to be a well-adjusted version. Otherwise, they're not going to do much of anything. The other three subtypes, everybody needs to be well-adjusted, but at least they'll be able to assert their energy to the world and do something with their lives. If they're harmonizing ESFP, the danger is that you're not going to really do much of anything. But if you do tap this in, if you do make sure that you build your executive skills and that you are well-adjusted, the sky's the limit, really. They tend to carry a lot of life wisdom, and it's because they're observing all the time and understanding the meaning of those things. They have that ability to tap into values and have a lot of clarity around the depth of values, which is something that people tend to, they need a lot of clarification around. People don't know themselves very well. And these ESFPs can really tap into a knowingness about the self.
Yeah.
They look past common assumptions and conventions. They accept other people as unique individuals. They don't want to let ethnicity, social class, or race complicate an interaction. So they're very open to people and new experiences and what's going on with the individual. So they help other people feel very seen, right, as who they are.
They take things at face value. What is really right here, not what I think is here.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so considering all of that, some of the great career options, or maybe even careers that ESFPs have chosen that have helped them become this kind of subtype, are things like psychology, unsurprisingly, doctor, massage therapist, yoga teacher, shamans. They might even choose something like shamanism. But even on a more practical level, they're good for, they're great for international trade, missions to foreign countries, cultural ambassadorships. And they can also enter things like athletics, right? Both performing in them and teaching them, music, right? And being able to help other people figure out sort of what they are designed to do as well. So a little bit of mentorship comes in here as well. So this, things like international trade might not come up on the top 10 list of best, careers for an ESFP, but there is a component to the harmonizing ESFP that makes them almost uniquely suited for those kinds of positions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for people who identify as this subtype to expand their vision of what they can really do.
So thank you, by the way, for going through all that, because as we land the plane here and just wrap this episode up, you as an ESFP listening, why is this important to look at these subtypes? Well, we often, through our lives now, especially in the modern world, we're serially monogamous with our career choices and career path. Like what you're doing now for a career probably won't be what you're doing in like 30 years from now. Usually we flex and flow through different jobs and careers, but there's usually principles or energies at play underneath the career choices we make. So if you could identify and understand the type of ESFP you are, the flavor, you have some building blocks to say, oh, that's probably not the right career for me. Oh, that one is probably perfectly in alignment for me because I kind of know how I'm wired. I know the ways that my ESFP energy shows up to the world. So I think that's really the key, because you mentioned something, Antonia, like, for like the harmonizing, for example, like maybe they start out as a yoga teacher in their 20s as an ESFP and they're really into that. But by the time they're middle age, maybe that starts to flex and flow into more, maybe they tap more into their shaman nature. They're going just from the practice of yoga to maybe more higher principles of teaching spiritual truths through yoga as they mature through life. So as we mature and we see personal growth as a maturation process, the same energy of being the harmonizing ESFP, for example, can play both when you're starting out in your career, but throughout your entire career. So that's kind of why I think this is important to know about yourself, which one you tend to lean toward out of these four choices.
Yeah. And why you are the subtype you are is also influence the other direction. Like you may have started out as more of a dominant ESFP.
Yeah.
But you found yourself in corporate America and now you're more of a normalizing ESFP. Or you may have started out as a harmonizing ESFP because of training growing up, but you found yourself in a profession that allowed you to perform. And now you are really attracted to all the performance components of a creative ESFP. So these are also ways that we can almost leverage where we spend 40 hours a week
or
more, right? Focused on these things. There are also choices we're making for what kind of person we want to be or what kind of traits we show up with.
Yeah.
None of it's right or wrong. Like all of it is just an option. It's just a choice. But these careers have as much of an impact on us as we have on them.
Yeah.
And so what we have chosen, like if a person maybe is in a transition period of their life, they've been a normalizing ESFP, and maybe they realize, okay, well, I have the capacity to play this role, but really I want to do something completely different. I want to do something that's more aligned with psychology or maybe even performance.
Yeah.
And now I realize, okay, well, I'm going to have to move into a different phase of my life,
Yep.
let go of some of the things that I've picked up here and have some flexibility in how I'm seeing things to move into this other career choice that's calling me, but is going to ask different things from my personality type. And so it just gives a little bit more awareness around how some of these dynamics work. And again, none of it's right or wrong. It's all just choices that we're making. And if you're at a transition time period, ask yourself, okay, which one of these things is calling to me more? And what do I need to do in order to move into that style of my type? Because as far as I'm concerned, we're not stuck in our subtype. When we talked to Dario on that episode, I think we actually talked about how it is desirable to be able to move in and out of these flavors. In fact, he was reluctant to call them subtypes initially because that sounds too concrete and binding.
That's who you are.
Right, exactly. And when it comes to your type preferences, that's something that appears to be pre-wired. It appears to be something that is not really, like we don't really change our type. But our subtype is more of a flavoring of our type. And it is absolutely something that we can, move through these different phases of our life. And wouldn't it be awesome to be able to show up as the flavor that's necessary for the context, as opposed to being stuck? So that's a piece of it as well. There's a benefit to being able to be flexible within all of this.
Yeah, you could almost look, the metaphor I like to think in terms of is, you could almost look as your personality type, ESFP, as the written musical notes of a song. And these four subtypes are four different performances of that song, four different expressions of that song. So a lot of people say, does my personality type change over time? No. But your expression of your personality type does change over time. As you mature, as you are socialized or conditioned in the career choice you make, that flavoring can alter.
Yep.
I think that's important to understand.
Yep, absolutely.
So for you as an ESFP on your career path, we'd love to hear what's coming up for you as you listen along. Maybe you've got an ESFP in your life. You're not an ESFP listening right now, but you have an ESFP in your life. Have you noticed this patterning? Have you noticed the ESFP in your life? Or you, if you are an ESFP, have you noticed you lean more toward one of these styles of subtypes of the personality type of ESFP? And do the jobs and career paths and some of the principles underneath it make sense to you? Does that make sense of like, oh yeah, I could see me being attracted based on that wiring toward this career path?
Right, exactly. So again, one more time, if you're the more dominant type of ESFP, you're going to be driven and confident. If you are the creative subtype, you're going to be more exploratory and sociable. If you're the normalizing, you're going to be more conventional and specialized. And if you're the harmonizing, you're going to be more empathic and reflective. So which one do you identify with? And are any of those career options that we mentioned in there really kind of something that you hadn't considered before?
So we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Do you have a career story to share with us? Are you in the middle of looking for a new career? Or maybe your first career. You're young and you're just starting out in the world. Maybe you just got through university, or you're entering the workforce, or are you a little older or in a position of transition? We want to know where you're coming from, what's happening for you, and what your journey is. And any questions you have, we'd love to get started a discussion around this, both from myself and Antonia, but also people in our community. I think we can support each other through the career process. And this is something I think on the top of people's minds right now is, what is my life path? What is my career path?
Yeah. Also make sure to link Dario's book referencing all of this, so you can go grab a copy of it, because we're using it as it's excellent source material. It's very fascinating. So we'll make sure to make a link. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. And I read them all. I do. Please leave one, because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and it helps me keep going, knowing that people are listening. So,
it really does.
Yeah, it actually does.
It's encouraging to you.
Review especially, not just the rating. The rating is nice, but the review is like, okay, I actually got to hear from a real person, because we don't get to interact with anybody on this podcast except for guests or you and me, which we interact all the time. So if you would leave a rating and a review, when I say it helps us out a lot at the end of every podcast, I really mean it. It really helps me personally out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have the video version of this podcast. So come check it out on YouTube. You can watch Joel's lovely flowing hair as
what's left.
Before
it all disappears someday.
That's right. Come look at Joel's beautiful mane as we discuss all things personality type. And if you enjoy what you see, you can like, subscribe, and ring the little bell, or hit the little bell that lets you know when a new episode is out.
Also, if you are still discovering your personality type, feel free to also come over and take the free test we have, a free assessment to help you find your best fit type. It's a great first step in discovering your best fit type. That's over at personalityhacker.com. And that's really the journey of understanding who you are and how your mind is wired. We'd love to invite you to come and take that assessment.
That's right.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.